Hello students, we'll now begin with part 2 of our topic Infrastructure Investment Trusts or InvITs. In the first part we covered the basics, the structure of an InvIT. We also looked into a few key terms and the eligibility criteria. We looked into the offer and listing of units, the guidelines for public issue and preferential issue. In this section we look into the listing and trading of units, conditions for delisting, investment conditions and distribution policy, rights and meetings of unit holders, and finally we will look into the maintenance of records. Many of these sections are going to sound similar to REITs, but there are a few differences. We'll look into these as we cover the individual sections. Also, there have been 2 questions from this section in our previous examinations. We'll look into these 2 as we go on. This part should take lesser time than part 1. Let's begin with the first section, which is listing and trading of units. Now with regard to listing, we have seen in first part how listing of an InvIT is not mandatory after the amendment brought out by SEBI for privately placed units. For a public issue, of course, it is mandatory. Also, listing will be governed by the listing agreement entered into between the InvIT and the designated stock exchange. A listing agreement is an agreement entered at the time of listing by every entity that gets listed with the stock exchange, which contains terms and conditions. So basically your listing agreement will have your terms and conditions with the stock exchange. In case of non-receipt of listing permission from the stock exchange or withdrawal of observation letter issued by SEBI, the units cannot be listed and the InvIT will be liable to refund any subscription money collected to the respective allottees along with interest at the rate of 15% per annum from the date of allotment. So observation letter is nothing but the letter containing the comments by SEBI after filing of draft offer document. In case there is a non-receipt of listing permission from the stock exchange or withdrawal of observation letter, the units cannot be listed. Moving on, the units of the InvIT listed on the designated stock exchange shall be traded, cleared and settled in accordance with the bylaws of the designated stock exchange and conditions specified by SEBI. This is similar to REIT. The redemption of units of an InvIT can only be by way of buyback or at time of delisting of units. What will happen in case the minimum public holding of InvIT falls below the prescribed limit? So in that event, SEBI or the stock exchange will initiate action which will include delisting of the units. Let's now look at the minimum number of public unit holders in an InvIT. That is the unit holders other than sponsors, related parties and associates. The minimum number of public unit holders is 20 in case of public issue and 5 in case of privately placed listed InvIT. Also, each unit holder can hold maximum of 25% of units of InvIT. In case of non-compliance with this condition, SEBI or the stock exchange will initiate action including delisting of the units. So earlier we had seen how there can be a listed privately placed InvIT and unlisted privately placed InvIT. So the minimum number of public unit holders in case of a public issue is 20, but in case of a privately placed InvIT it is 5. And each unit holder can hold a maximum of 25% of the units of the InvIT. Let's now look at the listing timelines. So a listing must be mandatorily done within 30 days from the date of allotment in case of privately placed listed InvIT and 12 days in case of a public issue. So in case of a privately placed listed InvIT, there is more time for listing, whereas in case of a public issue, like in the case of a REIT, the amount of time for listing is 12 days from the date of closure of the issue. Coming to trading lot, the trading lot for publicly offered InvIT is 100 units like in REIT. But in case of private placement, the trading lot is 1 crore. If the InvIT invests not less than 80% of the value of the InvIT assets in completed and revenue generating assets, the trading lot will be 2 crore. Now, a person other than the sponsor holding units of the InvIT prior to initial offer shall hold the unit for a period of minimum 1 year from the date of listing. So there is a lock-in period, just similar to REIT, which is 1 year from the date of listing for people who are not belonging to the sponsor group or the sponsors. The SEBI and the designated stock exchange may specify any other requirements pertaining to listing and trading of units of the InvIT by issuance of guidelines or circulars. We will now come to the next section, which is delisting of InvITs. There was a question on this section which was asked in December 2019. This section is mostly common with REITs. Also, it's not a big section unlike some others. Now, one thing students who have been tracking question papers of previous exams will realize is that the exam pattern is such that you get asked questions for 5 marks each. So, the probability of getting asked questions from sections that are small and comprehensive will be higher, because for 5 marks they will not ask questions that will require answers of 3 to 4 pages. Though you cannot actually altogether predict what questions will be asked in any professional course exam. But I would say that small sections and amendments would have a higher probability of being asked in your exams. Now, delisting conditions are more or less on the same lines as REIT, as I said before. So, there are broadly 6 events wherein an InvIT can get delisted. These are: first is where the public shareholding or the number of unit holders fall below the specified limit. However, where there is a breach of this condition, the InvIT need not be immediately delisted. The trustee can provide a window of 6 months to the InvIT to comply with the condition. So, in case the InvIT is unable to satisfy the conditions even after 6 months, then there will have to be a delisting of the InvIT. Second event is where there is no projects or assets under the InvIT for more than 6 months, and the InvIT does not even propose to invest in further projects or assets in future. In this event, what will happen is the unit holders can provide an extension of 6 months to the investment manager. In case of non-compliance, then the units will have to be delisted. Third condition is that if there is a violation of the listing agreement or regulations, then in that event, SEBI or the stock exchange will call for delisting. The sponsors or trustees will, with the approval of unit holders, can also request for a delisting in accordance with the regulations. The fifth condition is that if the unit holders can, at their own initiative, also apply for delisting as per the InvIT regulations. So the unit holders also have a suo motu authority to apply for delisting. And the last condition is if SEBI or the stock exchange can require delisting in the interest of unit holders. Now, what is SEBI or the designated stock exchange's role when there is an application for delisting? So, what SEBI or the designated stock exchange will do is that it will consider the application in the interest of unit holders, and instead of delisting, SEBI may provide additional time to the InvIT or the parties to the InvIT to comply with the regulations. SEBI also has the powers to reject the application for delisting and take any other action as it deems fit under these regulations or the Act for violation of the listing agreement or regulations or acts. So it can either provide additional time to the InvIT, or it can reject the application and suggest some other remedial actions. Now, what happens if the delisting is approved by SEBI or the stock exchange? Now, in that event, the InvIT will have to follow the procedure for delisting of units of InvIT as per the listing agreement, which will include providing an exit option to the unit holders and any other procedures specified by SEBI or the stock exchange. Moving on, what happens when after delisting? The InvIT will have to surrender its certificate of registration to SEBI, and it shall no longer undertake the activity of InvIT after delisting. However, it also has an option to retain certificate and continue to undertake the activity of a privately placed and unlisted InvIT. As we had discussed earlier, there is an option of a privately placed InvIT being unlisted. The InvIT and the parties to the InvIT will continue to be liable for any of their acts of omission and commission with respect to activities of the InvIT, notwithstanding the surrender of registration. One additional condition here is that in case of a PPP project, the delisting will be subject to the concession agreements. You remember the concession agreements which we discussed in part 1. So in case of delisting of a PPP project, the delisting will be subject to concession agreements. Now we look at the investment conditions and the distribution policy. An InvIT can invest in infrastructure projects directly or through holding company or through holding company SPVs and in permissible securities in India according to the offer document or placement memorandum and as per the InvIT regulations. If you remember in part 1 slide on InvIT structure, we had discussed how the InvIT can invest in either directly or through SPV or through holding company. What is different, however, in the case of PPP projects, that is public-private partnership projects, in that case the investment has to be mandatorily done through the holding company and SPV structure. So there can be no direct investment in case of a PPP project. Now, what is an InvIT not permitted to invest in? An InvIT is not permitted to invest in units of other InvITs, just as we had seen earlier. There is no condition of a vacant land like we had in REITs. So, the only condition which InvIT has to satisfy is that it is not permitted to invest in units of other InvITs. Now, as in REIT, whether the investment by InvIT is through SPV or holding company, some conditions will have to be satisfied. So these are some common conditions. Now let's look into these. So no shareholder or partner will have the power to exercise rights that prevent the InvIT from complying with the regulations. That is, the other partners in a holding company or the SPV should not have rights to allow non-compliance with InvIT regulations. And an explicit agreement should be entered into with the other shareholders prior to the investment. Shareholders or unit holders or however the SPV holding company is structured. Also, a dispute resolution mechanism should be provided for. The provisions of the InvIT regulations will always prevail. Then the investment manager in consultation with the trustee shall appoint at least proportionate nominees on the board of directors or the governing board. That is, the investment manager has the responsibility to ensure that there is proportionate representation of the InvIT in the holding company and the SPV. Also, the investment manager shall ensure that the voting of the InvIT is exercised in every meeting. Just like we had discussed during REITs, the investment manager has to ensure voting in every meeting. One condition which is applicable to only to investments through holding company is that the ultimate holding interest of the InvIT in the underlying SPV should be minimum 26%. All these points we have actually discussed during REIT, so I am not going into details. You can go through that video. Now coming to the manner of investment for an InvIT, again this is similar to REITs. So an InvIT has to invest minimum 80% value of the InvIT assets in eligible infrastructure projects, that is in completed and revenue generating infrastructure projects. And this can be either directly or through holding company and or SPVs, subject to the fact that if the investment is made through holding company or SPVs, then only the portion of direct investment by such holding company and SPVs will be considered, and the remaining portion will be included under the 20% bracket. So if the investment is made through a holding company or SPV, whether by way of equity, debt or any other manner, only the portion of direct investment that the holding company or SPV then makes in infrastructure projects, completed and revenue generating infrastructure projects will be considered, and the remaining will be included in the 20% bracket. If any project is implemented in stages, the part of the project which is completed and revenue generating project will be considered, and the remaining portion will be included in the 20% bracket. Now, what comes in the 20% bracket, that is what an InvIT is allowed to invest not more than 20% of the value of InvIT assets in these few areas. It can either invest in listed or unlisted debt of companies or body corporates in the infrastructure sector. This does not include any investment made in debt of the holding company or SPV. It cannot invest in mortgage-backed securities. Obviously, because mortgage-backed securities pertain to real estate sector, that's why I have crossed it. In REITs could have invested in mortgage-backed securities, but InvITs cannot invest in mortgage-backed securities. An InvIT is allowed to invest in government securities. It cannot invest in FSI, DDRs, because these are specific to the real estate sector. Again, it can invest up to 20% of the InvIT assets in money market instruments, liquid mutual funds or cash equivalents. And it can invest only in listed equity shares. It cannot invest in unlisted equity shares like a REIT. And the equity shares should be of such companies in India which derive not less than 80% of their operating income from infrastructure sector, as per the audited accounts of the previous financial year. Now, if you remember, in REITs this percentage was 75%, but for InvITs the required criteria is that 80% of operating income should be from infrastructure sector. Also, it can invest in under construction infrastructure projects, whether directly or through holding company or SPVs. However, the investment in such assets shall not exceed 10% of the value of the InvIT assets. So, in case InvIT decides to invest in under construction infrastructure projects, the amount of investment cannot exceed 10% of the value of InvIT assets. If the conditions specified above are breached, then the investment manager has to inform the trustee, and the trustee will ensure that the conditions are satisfied within 6 months of such breach. This period can be extended to 1 year subject to approval from investors as per regulations. We'll now look at some other investment conditions. We'll begin with the minimum holding period. So the minimum holding period for infrastructure projects, that is your completed and revenue generating infrastructure projects, whether directly or indirectly, that is through the holding company SPV route, should be minimum 3 years from the date of purchase. However, this does not apply to investments in securities of companies in the infrastructure sector. That is your investment in the 20% investment bracket. This condition will not apply. With regard to sale of property or share in SPV, if the property or share value exceeds 10% of the value of InvIT assets in a financial year, the investment manager has to obtain approval from the unit holders. So, in case the investment manager wants to sell more than 10% of the value of InvIT assets in any financial year, the investment manager will have to obtain approval from the unit holders, which is mandatory. Coming to lending, lending as an activity is not permitted except to the holding company or SPV in which InvIT has invested. So the InvIT can lend only to its own holding company or SPV. Investment in debt securities, which we discussed in the 20% bracket, is however allowed. It is not considered as lending for this purpose. Now, on co-investment conditions, co-investment means that there is a joint partner along with the InvIT. The co-investment should not be at terms more favorable than those to the InvIT. Also, the investment should not provide any rights to the persons which shall prevent the InvIT from complying with the provisions of these regulations. So the co-investment should not provide any rights to any partner which shall prevent the InvIT from complying with the InvIT regulations. The agreement with such persons shall include the minimum percentage of distributable cash flows that will be distributed and entitlement of InvIT to receive not less than pro rata distributions and a mode for dispute resolution between the InvIT and the other person. So the agreement should clearly specify the terms of distribution of cash flows and the dispute resolution mechanism. Other conditions are that there cannot be multiple schemes which can be launched by the InvIT, and SEBI can also specify any other additional conditions. Coming to the distribution policy, this again is just like REIT. So there are three conditions for the SPV, for the holding company and for the InvIT. We'll begin with the SPV. So for the SPV, minimum 90% of the net distributable cash flows, that is your cash flows after paying off all your expenses. 90% of that cash flows has to be distributed by the SPV to the InvIT or the holding company in the proportion of its holding in the SPV, subject to the provisions of the Companies Act 2013 or the LLP Act 2008. We had seen this in REITs also. In case of a holding company, the distribution by the holding company to the InvIT, subject to all the acts, will be as follows. 100% of the cash flows that the holding company receives from the underlying SPV will have to be distributed, and minimum 90% of the net distributable cash flows generated by the holding company itself will have to be distributed. In case of the InvIT, a minimum 90% of the net distributable cash flows will be distributed to the unit holders. Distribution should be done at least once in 6 months and not later than 15 days of declaration. Also, it should be as per the offer document and placement memorandum. In case of a sale of asset or share or interest in holding company or SPV, if the proceeds are intended to be reinvested in another asset, no distribution is required. But if it is not intended to be invested within 1 year or reinvested within 1 year, then the distribution is mandatory. So guys, I'll tell you that if you do REITs properly, then almost 70% of InvIT will be covered in that. Let's now discuss the rights and meetings of unit holders. Again, the primary right is to receive income as per the offer document or placement memorandum. Just remember that there is a placement memorandum concept in InvIT which is applicable to privately placed InvITs. With regard to the meeting of unit holders, just like REITs, there should be minimum 21 days notice in writing or electronic mode given to the unit holders. The voting may also be by postal ballot or electronic mode. A resolution will be considered passed when the votes cast by the unit holders so entitled and voting in favor exceed a certain percentage specified in the regulations. So if you remember, in REITs there were matters which required a simple majority, and there were certain other matters which required a special majority of 60% and above. Similar conditions exist even in the case of InvITs. Voting by any person who is a related party in such transaction as well as associate shall not be considered of the specification. So a related party will not be entitled to vote on matters in which they are interested, or as well as associates will not be entitled to vote. Investment managers will be responsible for conduct of meetings subject to overseen by the trustee, except where the matters relate to change in the manager or trustee. Obviously, if it is relating to his change, then the manager or trustee will not be responsible for conduct of the meeting. And the annual meeting should be held within 120 days from the end of the financial year. The time between two meetings cannot exceed 15 months. For enforcement of rights by unit holders of InvIT, minimum 25% of the unit holders by value other than the related party or associate shall apply in writing to the trustee. The trustee will then require the investment manager to place the issue for voting. If the matter relates to change in trustee, a minimum of 60% of the unit holders by value shall apply. We look into those matters which require a special majority. The special majority means that minimum of 60% of the eligible and voting unit holders will have to vote in favor of the resolution. These matters are where there is a change in the investment manager, including the removal or change in control of the investment manager. Any material change in the investment strategy or change in the management fees of the InvIT. Sponsors or investment managers proposing to seek a delisting of the units of InvIT in case of a delisting. Any issue not in the ordinary course of business which in the opinion of the sponsors or managers or trustees requires approval of the unit holders. Any issue for which SEBI or the designated stock exchange requires approval. Any issue taken up on the request of unit holders, including removal of the investment manager, auditor, valuer, and appointment of another investment manager, auditor, valuer to the InvIT. Delisting of the InvIT if the unit holders have sufficient reason to believe that the delisting would be in the interest of unit holders. So delisting by the unit holders themselves. Any issue for which the unit holders have sufficient reason to believe it is detrimental to the interest of unit holders. Any change in the trustee if the unit holders have sufficient reasons to believe that the acts of such trustee is detrimental to the interest of unit holders. All these matters will require a special majority. So, these are very similar to your REITs. I am not going into details again. Then what are the matters that require a simple majority? That is your approval by more than 50% of the eligible and voting unit holders. These include your routine matters like approval of annual accounts and performance of InvIT, approval of auditors and fees of auditors, approval of valuation reports and appointment of valuer. All these matters will require a simple majority. Approval for investment conditions, related party transactions and valuation of assets under the InvIT regulations will also require a simple majority. Transactions other than borrowings, value of which is not less than 25% of the InvIT assets will require a simple majority resolution. Borrowing in excess of limits as specified under the InvIT regulations will also require a resolution to be passed by simple majority. If the borrowing is less than the limit specified, then the investment manager can take the call in this regard. Issue of units after initial offer by the InvIT in whatever form other than any issue of units which may be considered by SEBI will require passing of a resolution, and the resolution will have to be passed by simple majority. Increasing period for compliance with investment conditions to 1 year in accordance with the InvIT regulations will require passing of a simple majority resolution. Any issue in the ordinary course of business which in the opinion of the sponsors or trustees or investment manager is material and requires approval of the unit holders. Any issue for which SEBI or the designated stock exchange requires approval. All of these you have seen in REIT. Now coming to the last section, which is maintenance of records. This part has been asked during the December 2020 exams. While the section is like a list of records which has to be maintained, so there is really not much scope for clarification. You can still try and remember some logical requirements. So just imagine what records could be mandatory for an investment manager or a trustee. Obviously, all records pertaining to their primary activities, that is in case of an investment manager, the investment decision making related activities. In case of a trustee, the trustee being the custodian of assets, the title deeds and ownership records of assets in the custody of the trustee should be maintained by the trustee. Then any kind of agreements entered into by the investment manager or trustee will have to be preserved. Also, all correspondence that are made with the statutory authorities or regulators will have to be preserved. These are some logical ways in which you can try and remember the requirements, because otherwise there is really not much scope for explanation here. We look into the details now. We'll first see what records an investment manager is required to maintain. These include like records on investments and divestments, and documents supporting the same, including the rationale for the investment or divestment. So as I said, the primary activity of an investment manager is to make investments and divestments. So records in that regard as well as the rationale for making those decisions will have to be preserved by the investment manager. All agreements entered into by the investment manager, so the agreements entered into with other parties or with regard to the assets will have to be preserved by the investment manager. All documents relating to the appointment of persons will have to be preserved by the investment manager. The insurance policies for the infrastructure assets. So with respect to the infrastructure assets, insurance would be mandatory, and then the insurance policies with regard to such assets will have to be preserved. Investment management agreement, which is entered into between the investment manager and the trustee. So if you remember in part 1, we had discussed about the investment management agreement, which is an agreement entered into between the investment manager and the trustee. So that agreement will have to be preserved. Any documents pertaining to issue and listing of units, including the placement memorandum, draft and final offer document, in principle approval by a designated stock exchange, listing agreements, details of subscription, allotment of units, and so on. So all the records with respect to the listing of units will have to be preserved. The distribution declared and made to the unit holders. So the distribution which the InvIT makes to its unit holders, all documents in that regard will have to be preserved. The disclosure and periodical reporting made by the investment manager to the trustees, SEBI, unit holders and designated stock exchange, including the annual reports, half-yearly reports, etc., will have to be preserved. So as I said, the statutory records with respect to correspondence with statutory authorities and as well as to the unit holders will have to be preserved. Valuation reports should be kept, including the method of valuation. So all the valuation reports that the InvIT gets should be preserved. The books of accounts and financial statements, like any other company or entity, the InvIT should also maintain its books of accounts and financial statements. Audit report should be maintained. The reports relating to activities of the InvIT placed before the board of directors of the investment manager will have to be maintained. Unit holders' grievances and actions taken thereon will have to be maintained, and any other material record that is required will have to be maintained by the investment manager as per the InvIT regulations. Next, we will look at the records to be maintained by the trustees. So these will include your incorporation documents like the certificate of registration granted by SEBI, the registered trust deed. These documents will have to be preserved. Documents pertaining to application made to SEBI for registration as an InvIT. This will also have to be preserved. These are all your incorporation documents. Then with regard to titles of the infrastructure assets, we had discussed that the trustee is the custodian of the InvIT assets. So the title deeds of the assets must be with the trustees. However, where the original title documents are deposited with the lenders or other persons, then the copies of such title documents will have to be preserved. So in case the assets are taken on loan or there is a loan outstanding, the original title documents will be with the lending institution. And in that event, copies of such title documents should be preserved by the trustees. Next is the notices and agenda sent to unit holders for meetings held should be preserved by the trustees. The minutes of meetings and resolutions passed therein should also be preserved. Any periodical reports and disclosures received from the investment manager should be preserved. So any correspondence with the investment manager should be preserved. All disclosures, periodically or otherwise, made to SEBI, unit holders and designated stock exchange should be preserved. And any other material documents should be preserved. These records can be maintained either in physical or electronic format. However, where the records are required to be signed and they are maintained in electronic form, such records shall be digitally signed. So in case of an electronic record, digital signature is must when the records are required to be signed. So that brings us to the end of this topic of InvIT. Hope this video has been useful. Do let me know your comments and feedbacks. I'll try and bring about any changes which you suggest which are within my capacities. I'll be bringing out new videos on another topic soon. In case you have any topic suggestions, you can let me know and I will try and get a video on that topic. So until then, thank you and all the best with your studies.